Rollin McCraty, thank you very much for joining me today, and thank you very much for agreeing to be a part of the Breaking Through the Void Summit. A pleasure to interview you today.
My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So we are going to be talking about the Global Coherence Initiative and what research is starting to show about human and Earth connections, amongst other things. And I'm really excited to talk about that because it's something that's fascinated me for a number of years. So I'm really glad to be able to share it with people through the summit. So just to position you for anyone that may not know who you are and may not know much about HeartMath, just to say that you are the research director at the Institute of HeartMath, and your research interests include the physiology of emotion, intuition, and optimal functioning, and your work focuses on the mechanisms by which emotions influence cognitive processes, behaviour, and health, as well as the global interconnectivity between people and the Earth's energetic systems.
Right.
Possibly, I think, the best job there is going in terms of what you do. And I was lucky enough to complete my HeartMath certified trainer course with you in London a few years back, and I remember you talking about the Global Coherence Initiative then, and I was really excited when you spoke about it. And I think it's really, really timely, and why I wanted to introduce it here, because the premise of the summit is about making sense of the world right now, and the fact that it's feeling somewhat chaotic and unpredictable. And I think the work of the Global Coherence Initiative, and indeed HeartMath and coherence and heart-based living, it just gives such fascinating insight into how the Earth and human connections affect each other, and how it may possibly be fueling our current position. I'd love to kind of grill you a little bit about that as we go through. But I also believe that understanding our interconnectedness is absolutely key to the transformation of humanity. And as a HeartMath coach and trainer, I know how transformational coherence can be. So without further ado, could you start by letting people know about the Global Coherence Initiative, what it's all about, and how and why it got started?
Sure. I mean, the Global Coherence Initiative, I'll just say GCI for short, so save some time here, GCI, is really about bringing people together to help offset the current discord and stress waves, as I call them, in the planetary field environment, and helping to, over time, replace those with more coherent energies that help lead us to enduring peace. Ultimately, it's really what it's about. And there are two main halves to the way I think of it, to GCI. One is really the membership, the people who we call ambassadors, who are really working to really create a more coherent, we'll talk, I'm sure, more about what that means, but positive field environment for Earth. And then the other side, so there's a lot to that. There's journeys when you become a member that, and help for how you do that and so on. And then the other half, which I'm more involved in, is the research side. Yeah. GCI is very much a scientific endeavor, and we have a lot of collaborators around the world, and so it's a very co-creative and collaborative project or initiative.
So you said you've got sort of research stations all around the world. How does it work? What do you measure?
Well, so what we're measuring in terms of Earth, we start there because we're really looking at the interconnection between humanity and the Earth. But to do research, we have to measure things, as you've alluded to. So to measure, what we're measuring of Earth is specifically the resonant frequencies of the moving magnetic fields, as opposed to the stationary magnetic fields of the Earth. So to do that, we've had to install very sophisticated, all-sensitive magnetometers that are specifically designed for this purpose around the Earth, and that's called the Global Coherence. And so there are these monitoring stations or magnetometers systems, and just give me a moment. Here's one here in California at our facility, because we're for Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Kenya, Saudi Arabia, and I think I got them. And then the next one is going to be installed hopefully fairly shortly in Colombia.
Okay.
So these are again ultra-sensitive magnetometers, And I don't want to be too technical here, but as I said, the moving fields, and that's technically called the time varying magnetic fields. I mean, that just simply means that they're moving.
Okay.
So when we think of, probably let's go ahead and dive in here a little bit, if that's okay, up to what we're actually measuring when I say these magnetic fields. And for today's discussion, there are two that are especially relevant for interfacing and interacting with humanity, with us, with human beings. So two completely different magnetic systems. And we'll start with what's called the geomagnetic field. Most people know that we have a geomagnetic field. So if you think of Earth, my little hand's the ball here, these are the field lines that have a north and a south pole, things that our compasses tune into, right? And they radiate out into space from Earth many hundreds of thousands of miles.
Yeah.
And fortunately for Earth, that geomagnetic field acts as a shield for the solar wind and all the stuff. So it's a very protective shield. Without that, Earth would be like Mars, with no water, no atmosphere, or very little atmosphere in a very short time. They'll just all get blown away by the solar wind. And it also protects us from cosmic radiation and all kinds of things. So it's a really important aspect of Earth. And so the magnetic field, the geomagnetic field, is basically what's thought of as a stationary or a static field. So it's a pure magnetic field. We talk about electromagnetism. You get electric fields and magnetic fields. They're two very different things.
Okay.
One makes the other, and so on. But so the Earth, the geomagnetic field is a pure magnetic field, very much like a refrigerator magnet, or any kind of magnet you stick on your refrigerator. That's a magnetic field. And the strength of that field is pretty static. I mean, it's not just the field's always there, static, stationary field. I mean, yes, the amplitude or the magnitude of the field does change, but it's very slow changes. I don't wake up in the morning worrying about, what's the magnetic field changing? Yes, it changes, but it's over hundreds and thousands of years. So relative to our day-to-day lives, it's not an issue. However, now what I want maybe the listeners to think about is you've got these field lines going out, right? But let me back up a little bit, and I'm going to take us back to science class, probably back for me, it was junior high school, I think. Science class, we got to dump iron filings on a glass plate.
Yeah.
And you put the magnet under the plate, right? Did you get to do that?
Yeah.
And then you kind of tap the plate, and magically all the iron filings line up and show you the shape of the field of your little bar magnet or whatever you're playing with, horseshoe magnet, whatever. But they lined up in lines, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just this kind of uniform black area. They line up in lines. You can drag the magnet around. It's fun to do, and they all kind of go with it, and so on. So those lines that the iron filings line up on are called flux lines.
Mm-hmm.
So the magnetic field of the Earth is the same way.
Yeah.
Okay? It's the same magnetic field as the magnet and what the Earth is doing. Exactly the same kind of magnetic field. Now, what I'd like you to think of is those field lines as guitar strings.
Okay.
It's tightly stretched strings that are radiating out from the north to the south pole to hundreds of thousands of miles.
Yeah.
And what happens when you pluck a guitar string or any stringed instrument, as far as that goes? It vibrates, right? And it has a note or a frequency. And you change the tension a little bit, and you change the note, the frequency, right? So Earth is exactly the same way. So the geomagnetic field lines are being like guitar strings and are being plucked constantly by the solar wind as it's rushing by. Meanwhile, Earth is turning, so is the sun, right? And you got all the solar wind coming by, so you get this complex interaction of the Earth's magnetic field lines being plucked.
Yeah.
And vibrating. And now the technical term, it's actually pretty simple and very descriptive, are called field line resonances.
You just cut out there. Sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, so the term for this, it's pretty self-descriptive, field line resonances.
Okay.
Right, so that's the plucking of the Earth's field lines, field line resonances, and they vibrate. And in normal days, it's when you have a solar flare or something, you got big changes in the solar wind, and the pressure changes, and that can change the tension on the strings and change the frequency a little bit.
Okay.
But for most of the days of the year, we're in relatively quiet time periods. You don't have big solar flares and so on. Yeah. And that solar wind is rushing by and plucking the strings. And one of the primary resonant frequencies of these field line resonances is 0.1 hertz. Okay. It's less than a hertz, about 10 seconds for a cycle to occur. Now that should be familiar to you, to your heart math trainer, right?
I was just going to say, yes.
So as it turns out, and the reason that I said that is we know that in the human, in us, especially when we're in a positive or optimal state, our heart has a rhythm. We all know heart rhythms, heart rate variability. We used to measure that. And when we're in this optimal state we call coherence, what's the frequency of the human heart rhythm?
0.1 hertz.
0.1 hertz. So isn't that really fascinating that our prime resonant frequency as human beings is exactly the same as the resonant frequency of Earth?
Yeah.
Right. So just to give that relevance back to science class again, we probably also, hopefully most people got to play with tuning forks.
Yeah.
Right. So you have your two tuning forks to tune to the same frequency, and you take your little rubber mallet and you tap one, and magically it seems like the other one starts to vibrate, right? Mm-hmm. So that's demonstrating the principle of resonance, or resonant coupling more specifically. Now in the case of our two tuning forks here, you have air molecules that are transferring that energy between the two tuning forks and causing the other one to vibrate if they're the same frequency. By the way, tuning forks, they didn't teach us this back in school, but are highly coherent systems.
Okay.
If you don't have a coherent system, you can't have resonance.
Okay.
Or coupling. You have to be coherent, stable systems. So the tuning forks are a great example of how you transfer energy and information between two things that vibrate at the same frequency. Now, magnetic waves work exactly the same way. You just don't need the air molecules as the mediator. So here's my cell phone, right? Yeah. So a good example, if I'm talking, or even us talking on Zoom right now, right? Wi-Fi, right? What's carrying that information from my cell phone or my computer, doesn't matter, from the phone to the cell tower? It's magnetic waves. Okay. And the reason that they work is the magnetic component of the electromagnetic wave goes through walls, penetrates right through things, right? So it's carrying information. Now, right here around me now, there's probably 50, I'm out here in the country somewhat, 50 cell calls going on. How does my phone know the one how does it pull that out of the air, that information? Well, quite literally, we create a resonant frequency in the receiver of the phone. That's the same as the frequency in the air, and suddenly, boom, you've just transferred the energy and information, right? The specific one I want. So when things vibrate at the same frequency, the point is you transfer energy and information. So what we just talked about is one element of Earth in humanity is that our hearts and Earth's primary resonant frequency are exactly the same. So we have an opportunity there from a resonance perspective to transfer energy and information between the two systems. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so then let's take it to the second magnetic system that our sensor sites around the world are measuring. And these are called Schumann resonances.
Yeah.
Okay, now Schumann resonances, there's been a lot to do in the internet in recent years about it, most of which is nonsense, right. Frankly. So Schumann resonances, just for people to understand what they are, we talked about the geomagnetic field, but then there's another element of Earth that's also really important for life on Earth as we know it, and that's called the ionosphere. So you can think of the ionosphere as this big soap bubble around the planet.
Yeah.
It's a layer of highly ionized gases. That's why it's called the ionosphere. And it's ionized to a state that it's called a plasma. And in physics, that's the fourth state of matter. And plasmas have very special characteristics, magnetically speaking. And I won't go into all that, but the one relevant for this discussion, the bottom of the ionosphere acts like a mirror to magnetic waves. So some people, just to give relevance to that, probably know about ham or amateur radio, it's called. These are the people that like to talk. If you're in the United States, you try and talk to somebody in the UK,
yeah,
right, or China or somewhere, and they collect cards and have a good time talking to each other around the world. Yeah. The reason that works is you send your radio signal up from your radio, and it hits the ionosphere and bounces off. Right, so that's how because radio waves won't go through the Earth. You have to bounce them off the ionosphere. So it's this mirror effect that allows that to work, just to make this practical for people. So magnetic waves get created in this cavity between the Earth and the ionosphere, which starts about 50 miles up from the surface of the Earth. I'm not sure how many kilometers that is, but I'm thinking miles. Sorry. So you have this cavity completely around the Earth. So when magnetic waves get created, they bounce around between the Earth and the ionosphere. Now, if those waves are the right frequency and wavelength to fit, a way that resonates, they become amplified. And so the technical term here again is called globally propagating standing waves.
Okay.
Now that translates to people speak into they're everywhere all the time.
Okay.
That's all that means, right? So if they're resonant, they become these standing waves, and if they're not, they just dissipate quickly and go away. So and those are called Schumann Resonances, and that was named after the German researcher or mathematician who predicted them mathematically that they had to exist. So they got named after him.
Okay.
And they were first experimentally measured in about 1960. So not that long ago when you think of things.
Yeah.
Now there's 8 of them, and this is where a lot of people get confused, right? If we talk about the first Schumann resonance, which is 7.8 hertz or 7.83 hertz, but it varies a little bit day to night and so on and seasonally, but around 7.8 hertz. But there's 8 of them, 14, 20, 36, and so on.
Okay.
So as it turns out, all of the frequencies of the Schumann resonances, 7.8 hertz. Does that sound familiar to you? If you think of human physiology, this might be.
No.
I don't want to put you on the spot here, but that's most people have heard of that we have brain waves.
Yeah.
And that so we divide those into frequency ranges.
Yeah. Okay. Which one is
one of the frequency ranges is called the alpha.
Yeah.
Band.
Okay. Yeah.
And 7.8 hertz is depending upon which system you use. There's 2. It's in the alpha range or low alpha, but it's basically the same as one of the key resonant frequencies of our brain.
Okay.
Well, as it turns out, all of the Schumann resonances overlap human brainwave bands and frequencies.
Wow.
Right? So what I've just said is that our brains and hearts are operating at the same frequencies as the 2 main magnetic systems of Earth, heart and brain. Yeah. And in terms of human physiology, this is really interesting. If we look at the magnetic field the heart produces, that's another topic here, right? And the heart rhythms. That's the big rhythm. That's the big magnetic field. Like the heart produces a much larger magnetic field than the brain does. Yeah. 100 times bigger. It's the same way with Earth. So the field line resonances, which overlap our heart rhythms, are many times greater magnetic field strength than the Schumann resonances. Right? So the Schumann resonances are kind of riding along on top of the field line resonant waves.
Okay.
Look at our magnetometers. And so we work the same way. Right? We look at the magnetic fields we're radiating, which we can measure externally from the body with today's equipment. Right? You can measure the heart's field about 3 feet away, and you can measure a brainwave about 1 inch away. Right? So it's just really interesting. I find that Earth and humans are very similar in the way that the frequencies we're emitting and resonating with. So hopefully that gives a little bit of background. That's what we're measuring and why we're measuring it. And we had to put in this global magnetometer system ourselves because they're out there, but they don't measure these resonant frequencies. They're just measuring the strength of the Earth's magnetic field, and when it gets disturbed, the ripple on it. Because they want to protect satellites and power lines and things, and that's important. But those type of magnetometers don't measure these things we've been talking about, the field line resonances and the Schumann resonances and so on. So our perspective was that those are really important because they are the same frequencies as we operate at, as humanity operates on. Right? So we've been conducting studies now to measure people's heart rhythms, heart rate variability, the beat-to-beat change in the heart rates. And that's important because the changes in our heart rate variability and the patterns and the amount of variability reflect what's going on in our nervous system. So it gives us a very convenient way to know what our nervous system dynamics are. Yeah. So we've been doing multiple studies where we do long-term recordings of people wearing these recorders that measure their HRV for 24 hours a day, every day. One study was over 5 months, right? And other studies over 30 days and so on, to
Yeah.
then look and see, well, is our nervous system changing and reflecting changes that we measure in the magnetic environment of Earth?
Yeah.
Okay. In fact, we just had 2 publications in the last few weeks on this.
Okay.
That came out in scientific journals, and a couple more that are in process of being reviewed and so on. And what we've found, I think this is really what your original question was about connectivity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the small study, the smallest of them, which is really one of the more profound ones in hindsight, was only 10 people, but these 10 people were spread out across the state of California. So some were in Southern California, Palm Springs area, some in Northern California, some in Central California, just who wanted to participate and wear these recorders for fun, right? And the original purpose was to look to see, are there changes in our nervous system activity when we see changes in the resonant frequencies and so on.
Yeah.
And that's all there, and that's all published. But the more interesting thing that occurred was a big surprise, actually. And we time synchronized the HRV data, the heart rhythm data, which again is just the time between the heartbeats, right? The time between each pair of beats. We averaged it to this time synchronized it and averaged it together, right? So if you think about it, what we expected to see was nothing, that it just all kind of averaged out to a noisy flat line.
Yeah.
Because after all, we wouldn't expect my beat to beat heart rate to be correlated with yours, right? It's not like these people were in a room together holding hands, meditating or something for a month. They were all going about their normal daily lives.
Yeah.
The huge surprise was that when we did that, we averaged them together, is that their heart rhythms were actually synchronized.
Wow.
It's a slow rhythm over hours to days, which was a new finding, that we have these slow dynamic rhythms as well.
Yeah.
But they were synchronized together as a group. And this was amazing. Like, how can this be happening? Right? And then it became obvious, should have been obvious immediately, it's one of our hypotheses, but it took us a while to get over the shock to realize the only thing that could make sense of this, that practically would explain how these 10 people spread across the state were synchronized, literally synchronized, would be that if they were synchronizing to some other environment, signal in the environment that was across the entire state.
Yeah.
The magnetic field, right? So then that was the obvious thing to look at. And sure enough, highly synchronized rhythm between our group and the Earth's rhythm, the power and these resonant frequencies I described earlier.
Wow.
So we saw that people were literally synchronizing to each other, right? And to the Earth. Well, each other probably because they were synchronizing to the Earth. So now we have this almost perfect context for energy and information exchange between the group and the Earth and each other. So that was a pretty amazing finding, and I showed it to a few different colleagues that are really into this kind of stuff, and it was jaw dropping. They were all like, how can
yeah.
unexpected. So that led to, we had to, we're kind of crazy out here anyway, right? We did a second study. We were fortunate to get some funding from a foundation to greatly extend and replicate that study. So we had 5 groups of 20, so well over 100 people.
Yeah.
And groups were located in 5 different countries. So New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, Lithuania, one in the UK, and then one here in California, who wore the devices, again, all together at the same time, to see if this same thing was happening globally. And sure enough, this is one of the things we have to finish the analysis on and get published, but I can tell you that it is a global phenomena, that humanity is synchronized globally, even though they're in radically different time zones. Our hearts are synchronized. And in that larger study, we were able to see that there are 3 different types of subgroups.
Mm-hmm.
That gets a little complex, but basically you've got one group who is what we mean by positively correlated to the Earth's magnetic field. So a parameter goes up, so our heart rhythms go up, or the amount of variability goes up.
Yeah.
Another group that's exactly the opposite. So you see an upwards change in the magnetic field, but their heart rhythms go down. I mean, the amount of variability goes down, but they're still synchronized as a group.
Yeah.
So there's two groups who are synchronized together as groups and responding in the same way to the magnetic field. And then there was a third group, smaller group, who was not synchronized to anything, each other or the earth. And can't prove this yet, but that's probably not the group you want to be in. Right. So, I mean, the hypothesis there is this is probably something going on. We don't know why. We really have no idea why people are in which group yet. This is the first observation this even happens at all, let alone, the whys for it. But, I would suggest our hypothesis would be that this is probably a group that's kind of unplugged from humanity, out of sync, if you will, with the earth and others socially probably as well. But that's just a hypothesis and will be a subject of future research. So what these studies have shown, it gets even better, by the way, but is that we really are interconnected in a way that makes a lot of sense, that where we can be sharing information across time and space through these magnetic field interactions. So you look a bit puzzled there. So
I'm not puzzled. I'm sort of mouth open, fascinated. That's so amazing. And I know when I did my training in HeartMath, I know some of your research has proved how when you have people practicing heart coherence and having a lovely coherent heart rhythm, those around them fall in sync, and how it's often the most coherent rhythm, that lovely smooth sine wave that everyone falls in sync with. And it's so fascinating to know that happens on a person-to-person basis, and then on a micro and a macro level. It's amazing.
So here, let me add on to that. Then, being just said that, because you're right, there have been studies that have shown that if we're in a heart coherent state, then in our local that our heart's radiating does help lift others to become more coherent. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Study that was done, another PhD dissertation study, and all published and great to show that. But now we'll take it one step farther. So our collaborators in Lithuania, I've got to give them credit. They've actually really gotten into this. Some very high-level mathematicians and a very high-level cardiovascular at the University of Lithuania are very strong and much appreciated collaborators. So their group of 20, which were medical students that were part of the larger study I talked about, they did this. Well, let me back up a little bit. As part of it, in the middle of that several-week recording that we did, all the groups around the world, we synchronized at time. So at the same time, we all did one of the HeartMath techniques called the heart lock-in, which I know you're familiar with, for 15 minutes at the same time. So the group there in Lithuania did an analysis of their group of 20 to see what happened in the couple days before, during, and a couple days after that heart lock-in for that group of 20 people. And lo and behold, that one 15-minute heart lock-in created a dramatic shift in the group, where they become much more synchronized together as a group and to the Earth's magnetic field that had a 2-day carryover effect.
Wow. So
in other words, that one 15-minute heart lock-in really is getting coherent and in sync with each other. In this case, in a group setting, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't work individually as well in the group setting. It had an effect that lasted, becoming more in sync with each other in the group and the Earth, that lasted for 2 days.
That's amazing.
It's really amazing. So as we really got resonant, really tuned in and synchronized, aligned with both internally and to the Earth and to the others, is the implications of that.
So I mean, that has real implications. I mean, really positive, beneficial implications.
Well, and even for me, the more I understand this and we really follow the data, you're absolutely right. I think we're just they're already profound, but I think we're just starting to understand the implications and how profound they really are. Because this is really suggesting we really are fundamentally interconnected at a very deep level with each other and the Earth. So
we've talked about coherence, and maybe it'd be good just to elaborate on that a little bit for people that may not be familiar with HeartMath, because I think it would be fantastic. Having heard that, if I didn't know anything about it, I'd be like, well, this is amazing. How can I find out more? What can I do? So could you just say a little bit about coherence and how people can get more coherent and sort of tune?
Sure. Well, okay, so coherence is a word that we use in multiple ways, and that can get confusing because we use it in its broad context. So the term coherence, well, let me back up. If you look it up in the dictionary, right, almost all dictionaries is coherent in the context of a person. So hopefully I've been able to coherently convey these ideas and concepts today.
Yeah.
Right? Where if I'd have had, maybe a few drinks before our interview today, I might have been uttering nonsense and you'd say I am incoherent, right? But it's also used in physics in very specific ways. And in physics, when we talk about coherence, it always means that different systems are connected and correlated or synchronized in some way. Right, so we have coherent light, meaning all the photons are acting together coherently.
Yeah.
Right, so that's kind of so coherence can be used to describe how well two different systems are interacting. How much order and harmony are there in these interacting systems?
Yeah.
So we use it in one level when we talk about heart coherence. We're talking about what's going on in our body, how coherently interacting are the heart and brain. Right, and the activity in our nervous system and all these different inner systems. So as it turns out, a great way to measure that is to measure the rhythm of the heart. And it will switch into this beautiful sine wave pattern. And that may sound, oh, that's no big deal. But for that to happen, just for the heart to reflect that means multiple inner body systems all have to come to be more synchronized and operating more effectively and efficiently. Very energy efficient inner state. So many, actually hundreds of studies later, independent studies have shown that by learning how to shift ourselves into this coherent inner state is really an optimal state. The brain's the big winner. We have enhanced memory, cognitive functions, better reaction times, and better capacity to self-regulate, and on it goes. Lowered blood pressure, and so on. So that would be a definition of coherence. We could call that personal coherence.
Yeah.
Or heart coherence, right? Or HRV coherence, all meaning the same thing. Then we also use coherence in the context of social interactions, right? So you have a team or a group, and now you've got how coherent or aligned are the members of that team or that group, right? You have a lot of discord going on, arguing, disagreements, and undercutting and backstabbing and all the stuff that tends to go on these days. In a lot of different group contexts. Or you can have a group that is very harmonious and working together well and getting a lot done and less energy expenditure and performing well. Then that would be what we would mean by a coherent, aligned group. So what some of our research right now is we're developing new hardware and software systems. You probably know we have devices for measuring personal coherence, the M-Wave Pro, Inner Balance Trainer, and so on. It allows people to measure their own, very inexpensively measure their own coherence. Yeah. So now we're expanding that technology to measure the coherence of a group. To not just say, not to just look, say, I'm coherent, you're coherent, what's the total of that? But how synchronized are we physiologically? So if you and I were hooked up, we could be saying, oh, how synchronized literally is our physiology, our heart rhythms.
Yeah.
And we're doing that at the group level. And we believe, just like the devices for personal coherence really do facilitate people in becoming better self-regulated, more coherent and composed, that we can do the same thing in groups so that people can really start working together much more harmoniously.
Yeah.
And, a lot of benefits that we think will come out of that.
Yeah.
That was a long answer to your question, but I hope
it was great. And it just, while you were saying that, it just made me think, I wonder if we could get everybody coherent, I wonder what we'd see in the Earth rhythm.
Wouldn't that be a great new world reality, wouldn't it?
Yeah. That would be amazing. So I have a little question, because I was looking on your website and I read about something about Alexander Chizhevsky, if I've said that.
Chizhevsky, yes.
Yeah. And how he measured sort of major events against peaks in solar activity.
Right.
And And it was amazing. The charts you got on the website, I mean, they're virtually an exact match in terms of the major events in the planet and major activity. And I thought it was really interesting that you said not only did that lead to sort of social unrest with these peak, solar activity spots, but also with periods of human flourishing and humanitarian advances.
Correct.
So what made me think is this feels like a bit of a crazy period right now in terms of humanity. It feels as though the rule book's been thrown away and when everything's not quite working in the same kind of regular way as it is. Are we in any sort of peak of geomagnetic activity?
Well, yeah. So what you're referring to isn't necessarily geomagnetic activity; it's solar activity.
Okay.
So the solar cycle, there's a solar cycle, and that's 10.5 to 11 years long.
Yeah.
So every 10.5 to 11 years, the magnetic poles on the sun flip.
Yeah.
Then you got kind of a way of tracking it. There's many ways, but it's the number of solar flares. So that's a cycle.
Yeah.
So they peak, and then they start going down, and then you have a minimum period, and then it ramps up on this 10.5 to 11 year cycle called the solar cycle. And what Chesovsky, just a little history there for those that want it, means you brought it up, is he was a Russian astrophysicist who got drafted into World War I.
Okay.
And being a astrophysicist, he was keeping one eye on what the sun was doing in solar activity. And meanwhile, he was down on Earth in the middle of a war. And what it looked like to him, it occurred to him that when you had solar flares and more solar activity, that ramp up of solar down on Earth just got stupid.
Mm.
And there was just more craziness going on and so on. So this intrigued him. And so after the war, he did an exhaustive study of human history. And the graphs you're talking about are just amazing. They're jaw-dropping. And that graph that's on our website is his original data, by the way. Okay. And what he found is he totaled up the number of major events that happened on Earth. And big things like revolution, starts of wars, back to 1749, which at that time is as far as they had solar data back to. Really, really elegant research. I mean, he did his homework. And plotted each year the number of major events and plotted the solar cycle next to it. And like you said, that's almost an exact, they're identical. Yeah. So he ended up creating what he called an index of mass human excitability. Right. A lot of the things that were correlated were, like you say, starts of wars, revolutions, which aren't necessarily bad.
Yeah.
But it kind of gives the impression that it's out to get us, right? That we go crazy during these times. But what you also added is absolutely critical in that it's the same periods of increased energy from the sun, really what's going on, was also the greatest periods of human flourishing.
Yeah.
Right? So it really gets, what it really shows us is quite literally during these solar cycles, the sun is putting out more energy. We can measure that. It's not some concept or idea, it's measurable. And what our research and others as well is showing is that solar energy, and I'll add on to that in a minute, it's not just solar energy, is literally an energetic influx into the Earth system, which translates down into our physiological systems.
Yeah.
All right, so it really gets down to how do we channel and manage that energy. So if we're not well self-regulated, we really haven't, practiced being interaligned and coherent, it outgates in more arguments. And if you're politicians, you go start wars and so on. And, in families, you have more divorces and all the, or if we take that energy and use it to figure out, solve problems, basically. So that's, I just got to miss. You're hearing me okay?
Yeah, I cut out a little bit. Yeah, just for that last bit there, Rollin. Sorry, but please continue.
I was just saying that it's really, we either respond or not, and it depends on how. So in our research, what we're also finding is, I talked about the geomagnetic stuff, but we're also looking at solar and cosmic influences. And when we measure these long-term studies of the people's HRV, which measures their nervous system activity, we're also seeing that there are other solar influences that also have a very strong effect on us. And one of those is called the solar radio flux. And that's a high frequency radio wave that's emitted by the sun, around 2.8 gigahertz. And when that's increasing, people here on Earth actually feel better and are healthier. Our HRV is increased. So it's another, what's emerging, my perspective is that quite literally that's another source of energy influx. That we actually use that as an energy source. And we don't have time, but I could go into the various studies that really support that statement. But also cosmic rays. So cosmic rays would be the another source of energy influx. It's not coming from our sun. You know, maybe the center of our galaxy, for example, would be a source of cosmic rays and so on. But also when they're increasing, we also feel better, and we have increased HRV and enhanced nervous system activity. So what's really emerging here is it's a very interconnected world. Well, I was going to say world, but it's more than world. Galaxy, universe, in a way that these different, very real and measurable energetic influences from certainly the Earth, the Sun, and beyond are all affecting us in different ways. And what's really being suggested here is it's affecting us mostly in positive ways.
Yeah, I think that's exciting. You know, how sort of thinking about the world right now and how it can feel as though it's in a period of kind of unrest and so on. But I think what came away, like, as we discussed earlier, it's also when we get our biggest opportunities for change and advancement to move forward in really beneficial ways, and how lovely it is what you were just saying about we are affected in so many ways by these, geomagnetic.
Right. Yeah, and it's especially important as, well, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that it can also be incredibly positive.
Yeah, absolutely. If we take steps to really learn how to utilize that energy in positive ways.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than just spilling out in our gaps, if you will. I mean, so people who aren't really able to manage their anger or anxieties, it will just amplify that.
Yeah.
But if we're able to really be coherent, learn how to connect with our heart and self-regulate with our deeper selves, then it's very positive.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I know we're probably nearing the end of our time, encourage people to do, especially based on these new research findings, is to consider, what am I feeding the field?
Yeah.
What I'm really saying is we are interconnected with the Earth's field all the time, and what we do counts. So are we feeding the field frustration, anxiety, irritation, and impatience?
Yeah.
Right? Or are we feeding the field more compassion and kindness and love and cooperation? Those kinds of energetic, literal frequencies. Because it all counts. We all contribute to the field. And a way that some people might be able to experience this is, it doesn't matter if you're in a cave in the Himalayas. When an event happens, it triggers a lot of emotion from a lot of people. That affects everybody, even if they don't believe it or aren't aware of it in ways that they may not be conscious of. For example, you might wake up in the morning and just feel edgy and out of sorts, but no reason. It's not like you had an argument or something. You just wake up that way. And then a lot of people would, if you start paying attention, discover, oh, there was just some big event, right, that happened somewhere, that created a lot of suffering or human, angst and these types of things. Or on the other hand, it works the other way. Certain days where there's a lot of groups coming together for global prayer and peace and meditations and so on, can also have a very different effect in the global energetic field on those days. You probably had that experience, I would imagine. Most people have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, and I could sit and talk to you for another hour or so at least. It's been absolutely fascinating. So I just wanted to finish, I think, by reiterating what you said. I think what would be amazing if people could take away from this interview is exactly what you just said. What are we feeding the field? I think that's a really good thought to leave people with. And I would say, from my own perspective, I think if people would like to find out more about getting coherent, you know, the HeartMath Institute, you have so much stuff and free downloads and books on the techniques and how people can learn them, or you can go and see a practitioner. I would really recommend that people look into it, because it is easy to do, isn't it? You know, getting coherent using the techniques is something that anyone can do anywhere, and I think you've just proved how valuable they are in terms of how many people, you know, are affected the more coherent you are. So so just thank you so much. I'll include links to the GCI and the HeartMath website. And
well, thank you. And also they can come see you and as a trainer and learn these techniques. If you're in the UK, certainly, I would think, and get some training from you.
Yeah, well, I see people globally, but yes, thank you
for
that.
Okay, well, globally, great. Okay, fantastic.
Good. Well, Rollin, thank you. That was really absolutely fascinating, and you know, everything you've said is so interesting to me, and I'm sure to everyone on the summit. So thanks again for being a part.
It was my pleasure. Nice seeing you again.
Thanks, Rollin. All right. Bye.